From the corrupt corridors of Wall Street to the lords of the City of London, from the gold markets of the Pacific Rim and the Far East, comes the guerrilla economist. He clears the fog of economic and geopolitical disinfo. Know the truth, see the trends, understand the players. Protect your future and family. The financial freedom fighter, a rebel with a cause. This worldwide transmission has been brought to you by the guerrilla economist, helping the world understand, prepare, and make sound decisions to protect your future and your family. Visit the guerrilla economist at roguemoney.net, spelled ROGUEMONEY.
God, I love that retro. That was so old school. I loved it. Brought a tear to my eye. You know, JP out in Scotland did that for me in literally 2 minutes.
Wow.
2 to 5 minutes. He put that whole riff together, did the whole speaking thing, put in the lines, and I was like, dude, this is a masterpiece. Holy crap.
Did you not give him a script or anything? He just
put
that out himself as an artist?
Yeah.
Wow.
He belted that out himself. I almost fell off my chair. From the corrupt corridors of Wall Street to the lords of the City of London.
Should we play it again? I'm just kidding.
Huh?
Should we play it again?
Anyway,
cool.
good
really
day, everyone. It is the one and only Matthew Aird is with us. He is the brain trust at large. You can find him over at CanadianPatriot.org, CanadianPatriot.org, as well as the RisingTideFoundation.net. And make sure you get all of his books because the volumes keep expanding. And also the work of his better half, Cynthia Chung. She just released an awesome new book that you got to get, which is The Empire of the Black Sun?
The Empire on Which the Black Sun Never Set, which you can get right there. Yeah, if you scroll down onto the front page of the website, the Canadian Patriot website, there it is. The Birth of International Fascism and Anglo-American Foreign Policy. It is it's scary. It's a scary read.
A magnum opus into the origins of the deep state, my friend. That is it. Into basically the insane criminal policies that we run, that we pass off as foreign policy. This book, Cynthia lays it out. Make sure you go there, get it. It's a great, great book for your bookshelf, for your coffee table, or your half asleep, semi-lucid relative who just trundling through life. You want to wake them up. This is a great way to do it. And with that being said, Matt, Happy New Year, man. Happy
New Year, guys. Happy New Year, CJ. And Happy New Year, V. Yeah, no, that was how was your New Year's?
It was good. I mean, I can't complain. I went into the new year with a torn bicep. My bicep is still torn.
Oh, yeah, right.
I'm not going to fix it. I'm just going to rehab it as best I can. So far, New Year's, dude, it's just more challenges. The industries are changing. Yeah. Gold markets are starting to change, which tells me that they're getting nervous. Right now, like before, I mean, think this out, man. We used to move gold for clients, and some clients, they take physical delivery, and the domestic American gold market is there's not a lot of big players, not anybody here that's like it's a small thing here in the US, right?
Yeah.
And you're not going to have like large orders, right? And now all of a sudden it's like we're having like international orders that come through. And all of a sudden, man, it's like the federal government is checking every single order at the ports. They're, the customs department is they want to know where it's going, who's it for. They want to know the person's photo ID. They even request the social security numbers, which has never happened before. That is alarming. That is alarming.
Yeah. When you're talking about big orders, I mean, we're talking here like over hundreds of ounces at a time, or like
big
orders.
If you're getting like a couple hundred ounces of silver, gold, especially, they want to know where it's going. They want to know the person's name. They want to know the person's social security number.
Mm-hmm.
And now I heard that the current taxing rate for gold, if you have gold, you're holding in the United States, you want to liquidate and take profit. Now I think it's raised right now to 28.9%, which is higher than capital gains. which is insane. So that tells me, with all these recent moves, right?
Yeah.
That tells me that they are trying to restrict access for the average American to, they're trying to restrict access to gold, access also to cryptos. I mean, scam, bankman fraud with the whole FTX BS that happened. He, like I said before, the man was the suicide bomber who got into a truck, laden with explosives, and drove it directly into the industry, exploding it. Yeah. I mean, there's some good things that happened to him. There's some bad things. Good things is a lot of insolvent exchanges are going to be going belly up. We've already have 8 bankruptcies in the last 3 weeks. Probably the 9th one is going to happen in another week or two. That's a positive. Well, these nefarious idiots are getting purged out because they never have the liquidity to begin with. But on the negative side of things, the only players that are going to be left is the large institutional legacy finance Wall Street, City of London players. So they're putting a stranglehold on that, Yeah. It's getting, so that just tells me, when I see constraints happening in the precious metals market, which was always off the radar, which was never not a big thing. I mean, you wanted to, put an order in for, $50,000 or $50 million, and you wanted it delivered anywhere into the United States. You want to have it vaulted in LA, vaulted in Chicago, New York. I mean, there's several LBMA vaults here. It was never a problem. Now it's an issue. It's an issue. I've never seen it. When you see these types of restrictions come into play, that's how you know the powers that be all of a sudden are getting nervous. All of a sudden they're starting to care, because that means when they start caring about crypto and gold, that means the paper fiat scheme is running out of steam.
Yeah, there's less for them to play with. And I mean, you could see that too. You guys saw the FDIC, right? The Federal Deposit Insurance Corporation had an emergency sort of what are these tabletop exercises / brainstorming sessions. And they publicized some of this stuff, but they wanted to keep it still low key. It was filmed, where they were discussing how the systemically important too big to fail banks are going to coordinate with the government to deal with the oncoming or the next wave of breakdown of the financial system. And they were basically discussing here, the whole thing was bail-ins. How do you break it to the American people and the Canadian people ultimately? Because we have our own Canadian Deposit Insurance Corporation, and every country has a variant of insurance on your savings and other forms of viable, components of the banking system. But how we're going to break it to them that we don't really have any, we've kind of used up all of our gas in terms of printing money out of thin air. And we're going to have to do something new now involving bail-ins. Oh, there it is. Yeah. Okay. And this is something which is such a joke to hear these guys uncomfortably talking about how, well, we're going to have to tell the people somehow. We got to message it out there and let them know that certain types of new asset classes are going to have to be created that are going to be converted into bank stock. And when any, what do they call them now? Systemically important.
Geostrategically or geosystemically important institutions.
That's it. Yeah,
something like that. Yeah.
Fail, basically, If they
bypass all the banks in general, or get rid of all the banks in general. They have no use, no purpose to them.
Well, that's the other option.
Well, here's the other thing. On a retail level, you might say that there's no use for the bank, correct? But on an institutional level, there is a use, especially in the currency trade, bond trade, all the other things that are vital for a fictitious entity like the U.S. government to exist. And for most of these Western governments, you got to have that scheme, and they don't have. And the federal government doesn't have the capacity to do so. But on a retail small level, look at HSBC. You look at other banks like HSBC. A lot of banks are pulling out of retail banking. Retail banking is right now gone into much smaller, more smaller players. Look at Acorn and all these. What is the other thing? It's called Eddie or Benjamin or one of these apps you can download and it's your own bank. You get your direct deposits into it. It's held on your phone. They give you a debit card. Everything's going decentralized. There's a lot more banks that have popped up, which I call them copy and paste banks. So they'll set it up. They'll have all the the banking licenses and whatnot, and all their wires are handled by the big banks. Like J.P. Morgan will clear the wire for, let's just say, a bank like Revolut, which is big in the UK, which is again mobile. It's on your phone. You can have your direct deposits in there. They'll give you a debit card, and of course, with mobile payments, you don't even need a debit card anymore. and then their wires in the U.S. will be handled by J.P. Morgan, and in the U.K. it's handled by Barclays. So this is the way it's changing the game. You know, so now, you see, if you want to play that whole FDIC thing, maybe a few minutes of it, because you know what they're really going to say is like, what do we do when we bail in Americans' bank accounts? What do we do? And watch the geniuses. They're going to be like,
how do we deal with the bank runs? Like, people are going to want to take their money out.
Well, that's what they're going to do. That's what they're going to do.
That, but then it's like, why are you going to steal their money? Like, it's
they already have it set up, Matt. They already have it set up. They're going to say, well, what are we going to do when we got to bail in and steal the citizenry's money that they have saved? Well, how do we offset that? How do we lessen the blow? How do we cushion the blow? And watch the setup. It's not going to be said in this meeting, but the real setup for this, okay, this is all the preparatory work, but the real setup for this is central bank issued digital currencies. Bammo. Go ahead, Siege. Play.
Well, and Jamie Dimon let the cat out of the bag a while back when he said that Chase plans to exit credit card business in the next 10 to 15 years.
Oh, yeah.
Can't forget about that. That's pretty significant. Okay, here we go.
It should be accessible when people need to know, but I don't think you have much hope of reaching a public that doesn't have a professional need to know.
I completely agree with that. I almost think you'd scare the public if you put this out. Like, why are they telling me this? Should I be concerned about my bank? Like, my insurance company doesn't tell me what they're doing with my assets. They just assume they're going to pay my claim. Right? I think you've got to think of the unintended consequences of taking a public that has more full faith and confidence in the banking system than maybe people in this room do. That we want them to have full faith and confidence in the banking system. They know the FDIC insurance is there. They know it works. They put their money in. They're going to get their money out. So there's a select crowd of people that are in the institutional side. And if they want to understand this, they're going to find a way to understand this. There's a bunch of law firms represented in this room. There's a bunch of people that charge them by the hour a lot of money to explain this all to them. And it's fine. I don't have a problem with that. And they all have huge staffs. But I would be careful about the unintended consequences of starting to blast too much of this out in the general public.
These guys are just collapsing into their own lies. It's too much. When you start building a castle on sand, it's going to come down on you, and then they're dealing with that now.
Yeah, I don't have the link up, but there was an interesting article that also pointed out, and I didn't even think about this, but for over $7 trillion of depositors' funds, the FDIC only has assets of $1.3 billion.
Yeah. I've read
that. This is why Americans, I've been saying it since day one, and that is this. FDIC says that you will be paid, read the fine print, on an interest-bearing account, right? And if you look at a lot of accounts, a lot of people think they have an interest-bearing account, like a checking account or savings account. Oftentimes you don't. And if you have like a certificate of deposit account, you're getting like 0.25% interest, right?
Yeah.
So the FDIC says you will be paid back in a bank failure or an economic collapse or whatnot, or things go belly up or sideways. You will be paid back anywhere between 0 to 99 years because it's not your money anymore when you deposit in a bank, because the legal jargon behind that is you are an unsecured creditor. In other words, you are the last person to be paid in a bank bail-in. And this also works in Canada, UK, and much of the rest of the Western world, because we have brilliant leaders that lead us, Matthew.
I'd read a policy study that was discussing the importance, and I think it was Mark Carney who was on this team looking at the importance of nursing pension funds, teacher pension plans, things like that, mutual funds, in order to get access to big chunks of, I guess you could say, assets to bail in the bank. Because otherwise, if they focus too much on people's individualized savings accounts and stuff like that, it won't fly. Like, people will obviously, as soon as people get a smell of this, they're going to pull their money out, bank run, bam. But they were saying, well, these funds represent hundreds of billions, if not more, dollars. And they're managed by people whose job it is to simply get a return for those who have invested, who are waiting for their pensions. But the people who have their money locked into it don't generally know too much about where your pension money is being invested. So it could be, ESGs, other things that are ultimately just geopolitical. They don't really have an intention to build anything or create value. They're just done to promote windmills, other things like that, but also conversion bonds. And I remember this discussion coming up that a big chunk of these investments could be put into the new conversion bonds that could be converted, so that you get a certain return. Maybe they make it a lucrative return, more so than your typical bond, or government bond. But the catch is, when a too big to fail bank goes bust, it'll convert into bank stock to keep the bank capitalized. Did you guys hear about that one? Like how these mutual funds and other pension funds are being used?
Oh yeah, it's terrible. I remember I was invited to the city of Fresno, California, police and firemen's pension fund, which was managed at that time. I don't know if it still is, and this is going quite a few years back. This was managed at that time by the same company that managed the pension fund for the state of Ohio. Oh, if you know anything about the state of Ohio, their pension fund went from a net positive to a net negative rather rapidly and quickly. The management company drove it into the ground. And so the firemen, and part of the firemen, they were like, they wanted to take a portion, not all their pension, but a portion of it, and put it into gold and then have it vaulted under the auspices of the firefighters or the fire organization's name in a vault in California, have it completely insured just in case on a rainy day, right? Kind of like how the teachers union in Texas did with the Texas Gold Depository.
Right. And
the fund managers, they came out with an overt no, right? They're like, oh, no, we're not going to do that. And I'm like, you guys are doomed. And because these fund managers, dude, they misappropriate anything and everything. Mm-hmm. And their whole entire thing is, 2% return or 3 to 4%, that'll be wonderful. The way they're investing people's money, nobody has any clue. And this is the problem with us in the modern West. It's somebody else that's teaching our kids.
Yeah.
It's somebody else handling our retirement. It's somebody else managing our investments. It's somebody else. It's somebody else. It's somebody else. It's somebody else doing everything for us. And we check out, and now we're about to pay the piper in a very big and major way when all these things, right, start unraveling. Because the number one thing that any one of these fund managers will tell you, it's not the client's funds that are most important. It is the performance of the firm. It's volume, right? That's the most important thing. How much volume they can make, and it doesn't matter what happens to the client's fund. And look, here's the thing with this whole FTX thing, and I keep bringing it up. There was a lot of poo-pooing by legacy finance on all these crypto exchanges that were insolvent and didn't have the backing to back all the cryptos that they were quote unquote exchanging and trading with. But that is the kettle calling the pot black, because legacy finance, when you look at legacy finance, they have no money either. 40% of the companies on the Dow Industrial, over 40% are insolvent. They make no money. Mm-hmm. I mean, we're in a realm, Matt, where it's like prosperity without profits, man.
Well, crazy. I was just on a side note. We can get back to the banking thing, because I do want to go a little bit into the history of this thing and what made the FDIC come into being, and how a banking system would be viable in terms of what FDR did. We could talk a little bit. I want to talk a little bit about that. But on that note that you just brought up, look, California just passed a law. I just read about this last night. I was shocked, not surprised, but still shocked that they just banned any truck that was made before 2010. You guys heard about this?
Yeah.
Coming into their ports to pick up goods coming in from California, which represents 40% of the goods coming into the United States come in through California ports. And they just banned any truck made before the year 2010 from doing that job, which represents 70,000 trucks that they just took completely during a time of increasing scarcity being created out of the wazoo. I mean, fertilizers, food production, basic things we've been taking for granted for a long time, on top of the energy scarcity. All of it's artificial. But in the midst of this, when you also have food production systems, supply chains being consciously broken down, not just from a pandemic, but you actually have arson. You've got 2 years worth of sabotage of major food production facilities all across North America. Now you take 70,000 trucks out of the game.
Yep.
It's just like you said.
And let me ask you a question, Matt.
Yeah.
these people who what are the odds that the people that created this law of any trucks prior to 2010, or it has to be like more, it has to be younger than 2010. What are the odds that these people are not experts in the respective fields that they're governing? Right?
Oh, 1,000%. They have no idea.
They have no idea. What are the odds that these people have zero clue on how even the supply chain works, zero clue on the logistics and the sheer magnitude of the complexity of the supply chain and all the reverberations that occur when there's a misstep that occurs? No, they're not experts in anything. They're lawyers. They're terrible lawyers. They're not even good at law. Oh God, man, it's unbelievable, man. They should have a law that people who hold respective positions actually have to have a degree in knowledge in the respective thing that they're regulating and or governing. Otherwise, you can't have the job.
It's called a meritocracy, and this is actually, when you read Benjamin Franklin, read his writings and his thoughts on government in the years leading up to the American Revolution. He was very clear that the only way a society, a democratic republic, could ever be viable is if you use a meritocratic system whereby people, that basically just means fancy words, right? It just means that the people who manage are qualified. They've merited the position of authority that they currently wield. That's all it is. You can't be born into the right family, be tapped on the shoulder to be part of this, whatever hereditary skull and bones club or whatever. None of that. You have to demonstrate competency. You could be born into a higher family, okay, like a blue blood family, whatever, but you have to be able to demonstrate competence in whatever it is that you want to manage. You want to be a minister in charge of infrastructure? Well, you got to be an engineer. You have to demonstrate that you've worked in the field for a certain period so that you have an appreciation for what it is that you're going to be doing. And it means also that you could be a so-called lowborn, right? Like a regular human being born from a regular class that demonstrates that you have wisdom, you have worked on developing capacities, and thus you could find yourself as president of the United States, as John Quincy Adams or Lincoln had demonstrated, So it's basically just that. And Ben Franklin had studied the Chinese system of meritocracy for a long time. He published the works of Confucius and the Analects into the United States. It was his printing presses that were the first to publish Confucius's thought. And he made a lot of push to try to, organize and make sure that you don't have a government based on graft or how much money you can get to buy a position, but rather just that thing we're talking about. Unfortunately, too few people listened to him. And instead we ended up getting this, deep state operation run by foreign agencies that had managed international Freemasonic networks for many, many, many centuries. And that's what the U.S. ended up having to deal with. And many great presidents who stood up to this thing. I mean, we're all facing the same beast at different times in their lives. And this brings us back to the FDIC, because when did this thing come in? It came in at a time when the world was going transhumanist, globalist, fascist back in 1933. And this is all of the nations of the world were being tweaked for decades before that, with their populations molded to accept the idea that we have to sterilize the useless eaters, bring about death chambers to cull those we can't rehabilitate, who have, bad thoughts, that are just not able to adapt to the norms of the beautiful society that we're supposed to bring into being. But that was eugenics. We had this going on in Indiana with sterilization laws. We were sterilizing people in Indiana back in 1907. Yep. And, Rockefeller Foundation, Carnegie Foundation were created to pour tons of money into schools, into health policy that expanded this from Indiana to 33 other states by 1933 that were all doing sterilization, teaching the science of sterilization of the mentally unfit, those with low IQs, those born hereditarily blind. There's a whole science, kind of like they promote. They call this thing called man-made global warming today science. They were doing the same thing for the science of eugenics, and you were getting degrees in this shit. And so, this was being in Alberta and in BC. We sterilized 7,000 people for having low IQs. We still do it. I mean, our government had to admit not that like a year ago that they were still providing incentives to indigenous native communities to get sterilized It's still going on. It was never stopped up here. I don't know about the U.S. Probably the same. So, and that's just one component of it, right? There's so many more facets. Before Germany even started doing it,
yeah, Hitler was inspired by us.
All of the Nazi eugenics policies were all modeled on what the U.S. and Canada had already been doing. It's just that he was a little bit less hypocritical about it. And we were trying to like masquerade it behind like this moral Christian veneer a little bit more, that we were somehow a democratic society. It didn't really work. Whereas Hitler was just like, yeah, we're not a democracy. Let's just go ahead and do it. And he really embraced it. And we saw what it looked like full throttle. But all that to say, this is what FDR was stepping into, was this entire world being remolded into a new type of society that would be shut off of its ancient traditions that allowed for the Judeo-Christian value system that put the idea of sacredness onto human life in a way that, you could say all life is sacred. The bees are sacred. The cows are sacred. My dog is sacred because they're alive. And to a certain degree, they're made by God's in God's creation, as part of God's creation. So yeah, you could say that, but at the same time, if you step on a bug, you're not going to go to jail. If you eat a chicken, you're not going to go to jail. If you eat your neighbor's baby, different story. Why is that? Why do we have a different, value for the different types of souls that exist in animating living beings? Well, there's something about human beings that makes us unique, because maybe we have a capacity of using divine reason, reflecting, using humility, wisdom, all of these things that animals don't do. We could think about doing things in a better way. And so coming out of this common access to this power, we have rights that animals don't have, right? This is something that Ben Franklin, all of the founding fathers believed in very, like, that if they didn't believe in this deeply, they couldn't have created the American Revolution to begin with and created a new type of system of government. And FDR had to deal with the fact that, okay, this is all being flushed as we're bringing about a new idea of human beings as just these machines to be canceled or scrapped if they become too expensive to maintain, or if they're defective by some glitch in the software. Well, we can just destroy it, melt it down, build a new one, or just make test tube babies, right? Which is also something that H.G. Wells was talking about and Aldous Huxley back around those same times in the 1930s. And leading Nazis were looking very seriously, like Mengele, at how do you create a new species.
Yeah, they want to create the slave class. And that what better way to grow slaves or serfs than having factory test tube babies?
Absolutely.
Yeah. All grown in artificial wombs, and then you could say
wired to not ask questions,
right? And because they're not fully human, because God knows if their genes have been spliced or will be spliced, they won't have any human rights. It's the ideal setup for these elites.
Well, they've already been creating a precedent for it with a few decades now of allowing Monsanto and private companies to own genetically modified, variants of life, corn, things, anything that they can just splice and add it like a new gene to. It still looks like corn, but now you own that particular species of corn because it's no longer corn because you put a little bit of a fish DNA in it, right? And I'm not against GMOs entirely. If you have a moral society, I can imagine why GMOs could be done well. But at the same time, under the current death cult philosophy that's currently managing this shit show, yeah, they're saying, okay, well, now we've got precedents for owning different species of life that we've tweaked. And now they're talking about doing the same thing with CRISPR technology that involves
You don't trust Bill Gates?
Well,
he has nice sweaters.
Yeah, he does. The sweater choices could change.
Are you making fun of my sweater, V?
Oh, I didn't realize, Siege. See, this is how it is. See, Bill Gates, just like with CJ, he wears a nice sweater. There's something disarming about a man who wears a sweater with a button-down shirt underneath it.
And yet there was something about Siege that got me today. I was like, there's something evil about Siege today. And I was like, I don't know why.
The sweater.
It's the sweater. That was the sweater.
Mine's a friendlier Mr. Rogers version.
CJ, I ban you from wearing sweaters while we're live. The only thing you can wear, you could wear a crazy Christmas sweater on every broadcast. This is where you look more festive.
There we go.
Do that.
Do that.
Yeah.
So where was it? So this is what FDR, right? Because we're talking about the FDIC bail-ins. So you had a controlled demolition, kind of like today. We had a controlled demolition of the banking system. And anybody who says otherwise, that the banking collapse in 1929 was a complete unforeseeable accident.
It was just an unforeseeable accident.
Yeah, that all of the broker call, all of the broker call loans were all called in on the same day at the same hour across the board. Yeah, sure, all of that happened. Where all of the brokers who were dealing with other people's money, doing irresponsible things, getting a lot of returns for basically speculating with people's savings. They all had to basically admit all at once, oh shit, we don't really have the money to pay back the loans we took to gamble, and they had to start admitting that they had to default, and that created a chain reaction and a mass deleveraging. The whole banking system, right? Anybody on the JP Morgan list, of course, they were fine. They made so much money. I mean, it's like BlackRock today just buying up, or Vanguard buying up all of the properties that they know are all being set up to be part of a broader economic collapse. So you saw a wealth transfer of all of these people in the know selling their shit stock that was going to blow up for actual money, using that money to buy up the industrial base, the farmings, the farms of America, real estate, things that existed in the real world. They bought up en masse, biggest wealth transfer we had ever seen.
Ever.
And they didn't do anything with that. They didn't like try hard to make money by retooling the industries or employing people to produce food or produce whatever goods you were doing. None of that. They made sure that with their ownership of these things, that they shut down the production systems, creating scarcity. So it's like, well, where is their value coming in from? What do they value? What are they a part of? And for 4 years, people were like pushed into the mud. We lost something like 6,000 banks went bankrupt between 1929 and end of 32.
Yep.
And that's a huge number of banks that went bankrupt. And of course, America doesn't have, unlike Canada, you don't have a tradition of too big to fails. We don't have thousands of small and medium banks. Like that's not a thing. We always had 6. It was once in like the 1860s, 70s, it was 6 too big to fail banks, and that's all we had. Later on, we had some credit unions. But even today, that's still all it is. It's like the big 5 banks is all we have in Canada. You in America have had a different tradition where you have thousands of other smaller banks, and you see, like, for people who want to see how one of these things work when your society is not set up to fail, read watch It's a Wonderful Life. That's actually, did you guys watch It's a Wonderful Life with your political mindset?
You know what? Yeah, I actually went to go see the play right before Christmas.
This year?
Yes.
Oh, wow.
Yeah.
That's so cultured.
It was a local theater over here had it, so
yeah,
I like to take the kiddo out for plays and stuff.
Okay. Well,
yeah.
that's the Bailey Bank. I mean, the
Yep.
way that is a small bank with a community bank. That's the way banks are supposed to function. People have to make a case why they need a loan, what they're going to do with it. The bank has a relationship with the people, and it's an engine of the well-being and growth of the society. So the bank gets this little return for the risk it's taking, but the risk is all tied to reasonable, justifiable investments in the real world, and that's good. This whole merger of these different entities to create too big to fail is a relatively new phenomenon, but it was already kind of bad. It was a problem back in the 20s and 30s. Not like today, but it was still a problem. But these banks under Hoover, President Hoover, had a gun up to the federal government saying, if we go down, we're taking you with us, so you better find ways to give us free money. And that was why Hoover created the Reconstruction Finance Corporation. He didn't create it to provide loans for the development of infrastructure. He created it, and you can see it like 80%. I looked at the studies. 80% of the loans issued through the Reconstruction Finance Corporation under Hoover all went to just bailing out the JP Morgan, the Rockefeller banks, Chase Manhattan Bank. It didn't create anything of real value. So the real economy was permitted to atrophy and shut down by design, while the banks were just extracting whatever they could from the backs of the citizenry, as they were promoting fascism as the great global solution to all of our problems. Right? Mussolini makes the trains run on time.
Yeah.
Don't you want to have bread on your table to feed your kids? Don't you want a job working on trains? And it's like,
don't you want some Lieberschwamm?
Yeah. So more Lebensraum. Lebensraum. Yeah, that's it. And the whole Anglo-American elite were all on board with fascism as this miracle solution. They had a banker, and don't think that the fascists of Mussolini or Hitler, who had this uneasy relationship, were the guys making the decisions of anything really of value. At the end of the day, they were installed and deployed and maintained by the same Anglo-American, especially Anglo. I'm here talking about the city of London's, command center of the 20th century and today. That was always the bankers' dictatorship behind the enforcers, the bagmen, the muscle who would be enforcing policies down the throat of the people around the world. And the world was going to be divided up between, like Germany was going to get some Eastern Europe and Russia for their slave colony. They were given their promises. Japan fascists, who, by the way, today are seeing a huge rehabilitation. It's not just in Ukraine; it's also in Japan. Yeah, a conscious effort to rehabilitate the Japanese war machine and all of these killers in the 1930s and 40s who slaughtered millions of innocent people. That's being rehabilitated to make it seem like these were actually the heroes of the war.
Yep.
Under new, Western-sponsored reconditioning, re-education processing in textbooks of history, and at the same time animating the decisions that Japan is currently making to change their constitution to allow for aggressive wars against anybody who threatens their allies, whatever that means, because who's Japan's ally when you have 50,000 U.S. troops stationed in Japan as a colony, a military colony?
They got a lot of balls, man.
Yeah, and they're now buying up Lockheed Martin, other U.S. military industrial, systems, like, even they're trying to install supersonic missiles pointed at China, while you have saber rattling and belligerent, military buildups pressing on China's perimeter, and Japan is being used. So they were going to have, back to the point, the New World Order was going to be Japan controls China, a big chunk of Asia, Germany controls Russia, Britain and their American, junior partners are going to control Western Europe, North America. Mussolini's going to get his terrain. A lot of it's going to be Latin America, some North Africa. And, they're going to divvy up the world that way. That didn't work. And so FDR goes to war with this whole machine in London. He does the same thing in the United States. And so the creation of the FDIC was originally part of a full spectrum war on this entire transhumanist post-nation state order. And it was done to, on the one hand, you got to give people some guarantees and some security that you don't have to keep pulling your money out of the banks. We have to make the banks behave as instruments for the greater good. But to do that, you got to tell people, convince them that, look, it's insured for the first time. We're going to insure, at the time it was $100,000. Now it's $250,000. I think in Canada it's still only $100,000. But that was sufficient for most people. Most people don't have more than that anyway in their accounts. So that was part of it. But if it was only that, it wouldn't be adequate because, frankly, the money was still not there to cover 100% of those assets that were insured. So what made this thing work was he also did simultaneously something that our current governments for the past decades have not wanted to do, which is Glass-Steagall. You break up the banks.
Right.
You say that there's no such thing as too big to fail. If you failed, you failed. And he let something like 6,000 other banks go that were insolvent, that opened their books and proved that they didn't have any assets in a million years to cover their losses. They went bankrupt. And so a lot of banks went bankrupt. He then dragged a bunch of bankers who gambled with other people's money and lied to the people systemically over the course of the Roaring 20s. He brought them to court. He had Ferdinand Pecora, a special prosecutor.
We need a Pecora commission again.
Yeah, it's not that hard to do. Yeah. I mean, he demonstrated how it works. He brought J.P. Morgan, John Pierpont Morgan Jr. to court and forced the media to cover how these guys committed their abuses. Many leading bankers went to prison. He then created the SEC, the Security Exchange Commission, for the first time to have an oversight body that would actually oversee the behavior of these gamblers who had formerly took people's savings and gambled with them against the will of the people, because there was no separation between commercial and investment banking. It was all done under one roof. And Glass-Steagall broke all of that. So you had all of this, but what really made it work was the fact that the idea of value was brought back to how Lincoln, how Hamilton, how McKinley were conceptualizing economic value, which is that your nation has to always be investing in the future, in the real world, by increasing the productive powers of labor. So if your money system and your investments are detached at any point from the process of reality that is based upon the need to overcome limits to growth, make life better for people by investing in new discoveries, new R&D, applying it to the production process, changing your education system in accordance with new discoveries as they come out, and ever more facilitate the plasticity of the topography of the system, right? Because every time you have a new idea, if it's a true and good idea, you're somebody working on a production line, you have a new idea of how to make it better, you tell the boss. If you don't have a flexible, adaptive system which is creative, that will be seen as a disturbance to be destroyed. That person will be fired because the way we do things is different. It's not compatible with your new idea, jackass. So they will crush that person. Whereas and that's part of the problem today, is that all of the innovation has been built up in either the military industrial complex or in entertainment, technology involving turning people's minds off and getting them to escape into some fake virtual reality land. It's not actually any. Look at the former industrial zones of Michigan, Philadelphia, any Windsor, Ontario, that used to be the parts of the world where Hitler said if he was going to bomb, if he had his wish list of V2 rocket engines, and if he had all of the proper like rocketry that he was putting online ready to go, he had his list of the different places he would bomb. Detroit was number one.
Yep.
Not London, not Washington. It was Detroit. Yep. Why? Because that was the zone that was carrying the productive weight of Russia, providing the tools the Russians needed to carry out their fight. All like the amount of production was incredible. And so that has been allowed to atrophy. It looks like Dark Age.
It looks like Beirut bombed out.
Post-bombing Beirut. Yeah. That's what these places have become. So we did it to ourselves. We've not been advancing technology. And so with FDR's New Deal, the idea was the Reconstruction Finance Corporation was now not going to be just used as an instrument to bail out Wall Street banks. He forced this thing to be transformed into effectively a national bank, a real Lincoln-style national bank. I shouldn't even say Lincoln, because Lincoln was killed before he could get one of these things going. Right. He came close to his greenbacks. But he basically used this thing so that it bypassed the Federal Reserve. It provided the type of lending to the Tennessee Valley Authority, to the Hoover Dam project, all of the thousands of other projects, big and small, that were animated. It looks actually, if you look at what FDR did and you compare it to how China has built up the Belt and Road Initiative, utilizing 4 state banks primarily, with a few secondary banks under the umbrella of these state-owned banks. That's what it's only FDR. That's the only precedent that we have of how this is working today in the 20th century. So the whole idea was 5, 10, 20-year projects, think ahead, build the dams that currently idiot eco-cultists in California are pouring $500 million to destroying viable hydroelectric dams that provide water and electricity to farms all over the north of California. That's being shut down to liberate the rivers. That was all built up under FDR. And so the idea was the very opposite. They call it the Green New Deal. They're saying, oh, it's for the Green New Deal, that the spirit of the Green New Deal that
it's the green. They're referring to the money that these elites will be making off of deindustrializing us.
Exactly. That's all it is.
Yeah.
That's all it is. The actual green. They're destroying the green. I mean, by taking down the dams, the water systems, and everything else that are being organized by the dams, the reservoirs. These were green areas that you are going to make deserts. You are taking green areas and turning them into deserts and saying the desert is the natural ecosystem. What does that mean? Philosophically, they're saying that death is the natural state of affairs over this artificial thing called life, which humans do when we desalinate water, when we manage river systems in a more intelligent way that allows for the replenishment of, vitamins into the soil that had been dead for generations. Now, all of a sudden, you can make deserts bloom. Look at what Gaddafi was doing. He was making a big chunk of Libya, the Sahara, blossom under his great man-made water project. That's what China is doing with its Move South, Water North project today.
Yeah,
it began 14
greening
years
of
ago.
Deserts.
Green the deserts. That's the way to be green. Green the desert. But that means you also have to embrace the idea that human beings are not animals, that our lives are sacred, that we can overcome the limits to growth, that we're going to need industry. We might need to even produce carbon dioxide by burning things, which, oh my God, plants like that and think of it as food. Like all of this stuff, industrial output, which is carbon dioxide, right? Agro-industrial output is not a toxic poison as the poor idiot Greta's out there have been brainwashed in their messed up school systems to believe. That is an excellent movie, by the way.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. The Chinese, what is it called? The Great Wall with Matt Damon. It's actually pretty fun. What do you got there? Yeah, that's right.
I'm going to show you the before and after. They're starting to green the Gobi, man. It's incredible.
Yeah. And NASA just demonstrated through their satellites, like in 2019, they had feedback from their satellites that were just measuring the amount of chlorophyll, photosynthesis on the Earth. And they were expecting to bring back reports of how much photosynthesis has been destroyed over the course of the past, decades of industrial activity. No, 10% more biomass was discovered to have been created in only 20 years. 75% of that heavy lifting came specifically from India and from China. China number 1, India number 2.
Yep.
Nothing really of that viable from the West. And they have transformed big chunks of the Gobi. By 2050, they're planning to have a big chunk of that Gobi, much more than even now, greened. They're moving water from areas that are flooding too much in the south up north where there's a lot of drought, just like what JFK and Bobby Kennedy were working on and looking at it in terms of bringing water from the north, from the WAPA, the North American Water and Power Lines, where it's not being used. It's like a desert cold tundra in the north of a lot of wastewater, and channel 5-10% of that water down through a series of a few dozen dams and locks, a few reservoirs along the way. And that would completely have greened by the 1970s if that had not been sabotaged. You could have already seen a total greening of California, Texas, Arizona, all of this down to Mexico could have already been lush, blossoming, zones on top of the fact that they wouldn't have been deindustrialized as well. That's what China's doing right now as we speak. And so part of, I think, the reason why people are being there's so much effort right now propaganda-wise to get people, especially conspiracy-oriented minds who consider themselves, traditional conservative-minded people in the West who don't want to be enslaved under a global Great Reset. There's so much propaganda being promoted every single second of the day just to hate and fear China. And I think, when you actually look at what China is doing economically on every level, it's because they represent too much of a memory of what we once were as far as a viable nation that was fit to thrive, that we once were. And they're doing it. They've gone from having 3% of their population living in the middle income bracket in 2001 down up to 54% of their population is now middle income.
850 million people taken out of poverty.
Probably even more than that indirectly when you take it in secondary things. And on top of that, they're continuously going outside of themselves to think, well, how can they help other countries utilize this similar type of model to pull themselves into a situation like in Ethiopia, where they have a massive business relation.
They're doing it with the slave populations of the Uyghurs, man.
Yeah, exactly. Oh man, and if you ask anybody to prove it, like give me some actual hard evidence. No, you get anecdotes. This anonymous source said this. This person living in Turkey, which I mean, increasingly now Turkey is waking up as well, which is actually another interesting thing, right? Like
exactly,
which had formerly been a beachhead of regime change operations. Not that Turkey wanted to do this, but they're a weaker country in regard, and they're part of NATO. They've got a lot of, Operation Gladio, CIA, MI6 operations going back to the 40s and even before that, messing with them and creating whole fifth columns in Turkey, like Fethullah Gulen, representing a big Fabian society.
You figure the assassination attempt on Erdogan would have woken him up, right?
Yeah, I think it kind of did. It was a slap of reality, and he did start pushing back and telling the World Uyghur Congress to behave and stop using Turkey as a platform to promote all sorts of lies about what's going on in China and the West. Which, after you look at the evidence of what's going on in China and the West, And you don't look at various people who have been, used by the National Endowment for Democracy to be, useful idiots repeating shit that they've been told by think tankers. But if you actually look at the evidence of Xinjiang and the life of the people living there, no, I mean, you actually have the very opposite of genocide. The average life expectancy has almost doubled.
Yeah, it's the worst genocide program I've ever seen. It's so unsuccessful.
Yeah.
I mean, my God, it completely backfired on them.
Yeah, really badly planned out. They're living longer, more productive per person. They're still speaking. Their youngest generations are still speaking their native languages, still telling their ancient stories that have not been crushed, even though the Chinese government has, I'm sure, tried to do all of these things. They never had a one-child policy. They still can produce as many kids as they want. And I mean, that's a really ineffective genocide. And on top of that, they're learning skills. They're becoming engineers. They've got high-speed rail. They've got, faster internet than I have here, where I live a little bit south of Montreal. Like bad genocide. Same thing for the Tibet. So if the actual hard evidence demonstrates the very opposite of the so-called fake reality we have been told by our corporate media is actually what's going on. And I mean, and then people say, oh, I don't trust my government. I don't trust Trudeau. I don't trust Biden. But then they say, but thank God we're sanctioning China for their abuse, their anti-human abuse of the Muslim.
But I believe them when it comes to international politics.
Yeah.
And that's the problem. Yeah. But don't worry, we have guys like Bill Gates. You saw the latest initiative by this joker?
No.
CJ, no offense on the sweater, okay? I was just joking with you.
He has a jacket on in his most recent video, so I'm
yes,
okay.
I'm bringing it up right now. Just don't wear this jacket, okay?
Roger.
Well, the Gates Foundation has partnered with DFID on a great number of things, and among those are work we do together on livestock.
Oh, happy day.
Helping animals survive, either by having vaccines or better genetics, helping them be more productive. It's making a big difference. I was down in Ethiopia seeing how chickens are out there laying more eggs, getting more nutrition, and even some small savings into the household. So Edinburgh happens to be where a lot of the world's best work on this is done, and that's why DFID and the Gates Foundation are funding scientists here.
What a noble soul.
There's been a COVID breakout, okay, amongst the cows. We must now vaccinate cows.
Man, really, eh?
Dude.
Yeah. Yeah. No, I know. It's but this is the same eugenics thinking, like the same overarching philosophy that was animating the recipients of funding from the Rockefeller Foundation in the 1920s and 30s that were promoting the science of eugenics, that were promoting even Mengele's work, and looking at how do you retweak the genome, or how do you map the genome such that you could then create or control the forces of Darwinian natural selection. Which, by the way, Darwin didn't discover anything. He found some tools were innovated that allowed for the manipulation of people, and they extrapolated some of the mechanisms that were useful for manipulating people, and then they made them universal laws. And that's all they did with Darwin. There is no evidence that any of the actual causal mechanisms of Darwinism were ever solid, were ever based on how the universe and how life actually is wired. It's completely bunk. But they needed it to justify the political system of the global British Empire, of the Cecil Rhodes, global federation under a world government of a hereditary elite who already have presumed that they are of a superior species than the slave class species that they are destined by blood to rule over. So they've already been living this way for thousands of years, but they lacked a certain scientific justification why their system should exist when people were beginning to realize that, this is actually, we can do things better. And so Darwin was literally just one important component to creating a new system of science that was all based on just managing the herd, and Galton, Darwin's cousin, Herbert Spencer, who emerged out of this, creating new social systems, extrapolating that to human societal controls, just with different variants. Like Herbert Spencer is very attractive to the libertarian Austrian school crowd, because Herbert Spencer was like, the strong will weed out the unfit. if you just let it all be, right? Laissez-faire. Just let the system just roll its course, give everybody their personal liberties to do whatever they want to do, have no government control in anything. And then the strong will emerge as the Ubermenschen naturally by just being better people. The Bill Gateses are just going to naturally emerge. And the weak will be killed off just because they're weak. And that'll be the way it is. But he sounds like he's more a bigger fan of freedom, right? So people who are more freedom loving are like, oh yeah, I like that guy. If I have to choose between him and this other guy, Galton, and Galton was like, no, we can't trust this to just be laissez-faire. We need to have centralized control on the system of de-weeding the human garden, right? Filtering the gene pool. That has to be centralized, and only a scientific dictatorship from the top could manage the levers. Yeah. So it became a false debate, but both sides ultimately were in complete accord with the same fundamental assumptions. So it became sort of like what we saw with Keynes versus von Hayek in the 1931-32. London School of Economics organized this fake debate between John Maynard Keynes, a eugenicist Malthusian, versus Friedrich von Hayek, an Austrian school libertarian devotee of Karl Menger, who appears on the surface to be much more freedom-loving, but then you actually read von Hayek's writings, like at the end of Road to Serfdom, people, they tend to ignore this. He calls for a one-world government to be the enforcer of a global set of rules that everybody has to abide by in order to make this global free market system, like ivory tower thing, function. It needs a global, benign feudal order to enforce the correct behavior amongst the parts. He's also a eugenicist in the sense that he believes in Malthus, and he writes von Hayek writes treaties in defense of Malthus. So I mean, it's a fake debate. Both of them, Keynes and Hayek, are lifelong friends.
It's Emmanuel Goldstein, bro. That's what it is.
Who's that? Who's Goldstein?
Emmanuel Goldstein, 1984.
Oh, yeah,
he controlled opposition.
Yeah, exactly. Emmanuel did he even exist?
No.
It's complete controlled opposition. So we're being played again and again. And the reality is, when you, again, look at what FDR did, look at what Lincoln was doing, look at what McKinley was doing, look at what every great American president who was assassinated is doing. Look at how constitutional banking works. Look at what Ben Franklin was thinking regarding meritocracy. See, I'm just recapping now. Look at what he was actually organizing regarding his concept of natural law enshrined in a government that rejects the hereditary order and instead posits that every human being is sovereign and that the law has to fulfill, including economic law, which Ben Franklin, he destroys Malthus before there was Malthus. If anybody wants a good Ben Franklin read, pick up his 1751 Observations Concerning the Increase of Mankind. Ben Franklin is annihilating the Malthusians before there was Malthus. They were still thinking this way. And Malthus is what went on to inform Charles Darwin later on, as Darwin was trying to figure out, well, what is the mechanism that I'm going to say is causing the changes of species from lower order species to different species in time. He said, I found it in Malthus's essay on population. That's what he says in his autobiography, was the race for scarcity in a world of diminishing returns. He said finally created a tension whereby creative innovation arises. And he got this idea from Malthus. Ben Franklin annihilates that. Ben Franklin works to create a new type of political economy founded upon the studies of both China as well as Colbertist principles that were what animated the best of French and even English traditions before the American Revolution. So this is what was taken up by Alexander Hamilton, who innovated what a real national bank, real protectionism, real internal developments should actually be. And this is what every great president who's shot at or dies while in office is all invoking. And this is what China and the Belt and Road Initiative and the new architecture, security, and financial that's emerging around Russia, China, Iran, increasingly also Turkey, as Turkey builds diplomatic bridges. Now that's currently happening with Syria for the first time since 2011. They're being brought on board. The Gulf states, insane psychopath, like nations like Saudi Arabia, who have been so tightly controlled, just as Turkey has. And were all promised by their controllers that they would all have certain jurisdictions in the New World Order. Saudi Arabia would have its jurisdiction. Turkey would have their greater Ottoman Empire promised to them as being local managers. But the Kurds were also told and promised by their Anglo-American handlers that they would have Kurdistan finally as this region that overlaps Iran and Iraq and Syria and Turkey. And they would finally have that. And everyone was given these promises. And I think finally they all came to the same probably helped by Russia and China, arranging backdoor back channel diplomacy. They got people from Saudi Arabia, Turkey. The Kurds are still left out of the loop. I feel bad for the idiot Kurds, but they've all been. I mean, not all Kurds, but I mean the ones who have been used like tools to fight as proxies for a war.
Yes, the Americans, they will help us.
Yeah, I don't want to insult my Kurdish friends out there. I just mean those ones.
He's talking about the lackeys who were set up by the CIA again.
But they all sat down, it seems, in the same room and talked with each other, which they never did before, and realized they've all been promised things that overlap each other, that the promises mean nothing. They're all flushable. And now they're realizing that the only game in town which is viable, which actually cares about their survival and win and self-interest in a genuine way, is coming from Eurasia. It's not coming from the former controllers of these areas. So you have the most incredible, and I think this is, again, going to shape really 2023. This is the most important thing, is that when you look at Sergei Glaziev, one of the key figures organizing the Eurasian this alternative Eurasian economic system with the integration of the Eurasian Economic Union ever more with the Belt and Road Initiative, as well as with the North-South Transportation Corridor. I mean, he's working with his Chinese colleagues on a very high level. He is a student of LaRouche's Science of Economy, and he has said so and described as much. I mean, this is like the driving force of world progress that's happening, and the oligarchy is losing control of that entire part of the world. And I think that that's like the only reason why I'm currently an optimistic person, is because I actually see for the first time a viable fight in my lifetime brought to the table right now that could crush this oligarchy's power and provide, maybe not in the immediate short term, but at the very least in the next decades, a real viable future where we in the West here can rediscover what we once were by working on things that transcend the bookends of our birth and death. That's the way we find ourselves, is work on things that are going to measurably and intelligibly live beyond the limits of our lives. And as we do these things for our kids and grandkids and humanity, we become better people. We discover more of what we are, and we tap into the same source that people like Ben Franklin and those who died for the revolution back in 1776 were tapping into that source. That's all good. That's if we do that, we won't be perfect people, but we'll be better people, and we'll be people who are not compatible with being slaves under an oligarchical wannabe god class, which is really good. That's a great way, I think, to look at the future.
Very well said, Matt, and I agree with you 100%. If it was not for the multipolar world, I too would have lost all hope in humanity.
Amen.
And a real fight. Not only is a fight, but it's actually winning, and it's winning much of the world. Thank God for that.
Yep.
Matthew Ehret, thank you for joining us, man. It's been awesome. Time flies when you're having fun. Again, folks, you can go check out Matt's work over at CanadianPatriot.org, CanadianPatriot.org, as well as the Rising Tide Foundation.net, and get the books for both Matthew and Cynthia. Super important that you do. With that being said, CJ, hey, Matt, any last words?
Oh, that's pretty good. Oh man, I just know somebody asked, what did Maury Strong do in China? My volume 2 of Clash of the Two Americas has a whole chapter on Maury Strong, and he was basically thrown away. He made some missteps and was deployed to bring the green agenda into China, and that's what he did for the last 10 years of his horrific and horror-filled life as a tool of the oligarchy. So I just want to say that one caught my eye. Otherwise, the only thing I would say on top of that would be in about 2 weeks' time, Volume 4 of the Clash of the Two Americas on the Anglo-Venetian roots of the deep state is going to be released. So keep your eyes peeled for that. That's going to be explosive, going from Babylon to Venice to Britain and beyond. So that'll be a big read.
Very well said. And with that being said, CJ, take it away.